What is going on, everyone? Before we get into today's video, I want to give a big shout out to A1 Comics for A1 Wednesday. Don't forget to follow them on Instagram. Their link is in the description below. They have live sales every Wednesday and Friday on the IG. Don't forget to check them out on Twitch every Thursday as well. And of course, they are on the Whatnot app. What is going on, everyone? Chris with Journals, Comics, and Pop Culture. Today, we are breaking down the census count of graded books, specifically in the 9.8 grade. So hopefully this will answer some of your questions when you ask, is this comic book in a 9.8 really scarce? Let's just get into this. Before we do, though, if you aren't subscribed to the channel, please take some time to do so. I'm here making content almost every single day of the week. Check out all the links in the description below as well. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about scarcity when it comes to comic books, but specifically graded comic books in those 9.8s. Now, the first thing that I want to break down before we get into analyzing some books here is when we use the term scarcity, you all have to understand it in two different ways. Okay, one, scarcity pertains to production. So that means how many of something were actually produced or can be produced, how many actually exist out there, right? But the second time that we can use the term scarcity in a different context is when it speaks to market supply. So those are usually going to be two different numbers because scarcity on the market correlates directly to demand. You got to understand there could be a couple thousand of something that was actually made, or maybe there's even a couple millions of some type of product that's not scarce when you think of how many were actually produced. But if we're talking about comic books, how many of those comic books are on the market at any given time? And how many of those comic books that are on the market at any given time are in a high grade? So you can say, well, there's only 2 or 3 of these books on eBay right now in a 9.8, so it's essentially scarce on the market, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's scarce in terms of print run. So you all want to make sure you understand those two different contexts of when we can use the term scarce pertaining to scarcity. All right, let's look at some different books because I've recently talked in the past about how I think a lot of people get caught up when it comes to graded books on census count. Oh, there's only 20 books of these on the census. It must be scarce. I must pay hundreds of dollars for this book then. Not always the case. We're going to start off with a nice Silver Age key right here. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 14. This is the first appearance of the Green Goblin. Now, obviously, this is a big key book, a big Silver Age book. It's not Amazing Spider-Man number 1, but we all know that the Green Goblin is one of Spider-Man's biggest villains. So we're going to look over here and we're going to see that there are 3,800 universal grades out there on the census, folks, okay? Now let's look at this 9.8. There's only one. And in every other grade, I mean, look at these high grades, 26 9.6s, 28 9.4s. When you start getting into these low grades, that's when you start seeing these numbers boost up in the 200s, the 300s. And you can even go into some of the lower grades where, you still have 200 to 300 count there as well. So how do we gauge the scarcity of this book, both in existence and on the market? Well, first off, we want to look to if it's scarce in terms of in existence. So when we look at these high grades, I'm going to make a hypothesis and say there's only one 9.8 and only 20 something of a 9.6 and a 9.4. I'm going to look at those numbers and assume that this book is absolutely scarce, not just on the market at any given time, but scarce in terms of existence. Then we take into consideration the factors of why that may be. Well, it's a Silver Age book. It's an older book that came out in 1964. So you got to understand that a book that age, from that time period, a lot of them didn't hold up to keep those high grades. That's why you see a lot of lower grades with a much higher count. So when you look at this number of 3,803 here, it goes to show you that the demand is out there. People want to send these books into CGC or CBCS to get graded, and they are, and more books are coming back as lower grades. Those are huge indicators to tell me that it's going to, even if there's a decent amount of raw copies that are out there still that have the potential to be sent off to get graded, these are indicators that show me that a lot of those are not going to come back high grade, especially 9.8, because there's still right now only one of them. That right there is a huge indicator of these factors to be fact. All right. Now, let's pull up another Silver Age book. This is Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos, number 9. This came out around the same time as Amazing Spider-Man number 14. Now, this isn't a key book of any sorts, and obviously it doesn't command like ASM Silver Age books do. So let's look at these numbers. Now, there's only 128 universals on the census. Oh my gosh, there's only one 9.8. That must mean this book is hugely scarce. Now, let's look at the lower grades, though. Only 2 9.6s, only 4 9.4s, 16, 13, 18. Oh, let's get down into those lower grades. Not much action going down here. Does this mean that this book is scarce in existence and or on the market because there's only one 9.8, 2 9.6s? No. When you look at the total sent in, 128, next to the 3,803, it shows me that there's no real demand for it. There's no real demand that anybody has for this book to say, I'm going to spend money and send this book out to CGC or CBCS. So when I look at these low numbers and these low census counts, it doesn't tell me that this book is valuable because it's scarce. And remember, scarce and rare doesn't always equate to being valuable. There could be something that's rare in existence. There could be something that only has 5 out there. But if 5 people don't want it, it's going to be worthless. Nobody's going to want to pay money for it if nobody desires it. This right here is a book that, although even in high grade, yeah, because it's a Silver Age book from 1964, I'm sure that in existence, the potential high grades out there are probably scarce, but these low numbers don't show me that scarcity equates to value of any source. Now, the rare numbers of all the grades as well doesn't show a scarcity to graded books. And it shows me that there's probably a plethora of these books still out there that could be graded. This book could reflect 3,000 graded copies, just like Amazing Spider-Man 14, if people really wanted to spend the money to send this book in to get graded, but they don't. So, low census count here of all grades don't automatically equate to scarcity, and it absolutely doesn't automatically equate to value. All right, let's go and look at some Bronze Age books. So right here we have Werewolf by Night 32. Obviously, this is a blue chip key, in my humble opinion, from the Bronze Age. This book is on fire right now, too, with everything Moon Knight, with the Moon Knight show. First appearance of Moon Knight. Let's look at these numbers. 8,412, so a decent amount. Let's look at these 9.8s. 28. Now let's look at 9.6s, 132. As we get lower and lower, you can see these numbers are increasing. And then, obviously, these grades around here are kind of, in the same ballpark. We have anywhere from 6 to 800. Lower grades still in the 2 to 3 to 400s. So, to me, this 8,412 shows that there is a high demand for this book. People are definitely sending it in. But only 28 9.8s on the census. Again, I mean, this is a Bronze Age book, 1975. It's not as old as your Silver Ages, but look, it's still, 47 years old, and a lot of these books were treated similarly to your Silver Age books. So I'm going to assume that low 9.8 number means it's going to be fairly difficult to find this book in a 9.8 to send in to get graded. Now let's do a comparison of another Bronze Age book that came out around the same time. Marvel Triple Action number 24. This is, retelling, reprint of the early Avengers stories. And look at this. There's only two on the census, and they're in 9.6. There's no 9.8s. There's only two 9.6. This book must be extremely valuable because the census numbers are so low. Nope. Literally, nobody cares. Literally, this book, again, could have around that 8,000 mark if people really wanted to send them in. So it goes to show you again, this is another example that census count doesn't equate to something being scarce and in high demand and having value. It can mean that nobody cares to send that book in to get graded. But again, you know, I really think if you look at the age of this book, it's going to be tough to get those 9.8 grades. So I think that number is going to be scarce on the market. I think this book, this number right here, this universal number, because of this book being so hot, that's going to keep increasing over the next year, 2 years, 5 years plus. But I'm very confident in saying that my hunch is the rate that this 9.8 is going to increase is going to be much, much lower, a much lower rate than obviously some of these lower grades. So let's look at actually, I'm going to bring up one more Bronze Age book, and we're going to look at Tomb of Dracula, number 10. It came out almost 2 years earlier, so it's a little older, but let's look. Let's look at these. So it has 3,500. I think Moon Knight, I understand why Moon Knight has a bit more than doubled on the census, but look, 49 next to that 28. So, Tomb of Dracula, first appearance of Blade, has less than half on the census and about double 9.8s. But I think, again, if you look at what all the other grades are doing, 2 to 300 at close to 400 here, there's a similar trend. It is much, much harder to get these books in 9.8s. Where watch, once we get to newer books, you're not going to see this trend of as we get lower and lower, these numbers get higher. You're going to see higher counts here on the census, and it's going to get lower and lower and lower because as we get into modern books, people only really care about sending in those high grades, right? All right, let's look at some Copper Age, so some early 90s Copper Age books. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 361. First full appearance of Carnage here, obviously. 42,666 on the census. Wow. Now, if we look at 9.8, there's 10,000, there's 15,000 9.6s, 7,000. So what did I say as we get to more newer books? Look at how it drops off. We have very, very few as we get down to lower grades, and the higher numbers are in the high grades. So, what does this tell you? This book is not scarce at all in terms of production, right? And because of how high the print run was, I'm sure this number, as more of these books come in, because people took care of their books in the 90s, they did, you have a much higher rate, a much higher percentage of a rate of these high grades going up and increasing as more books get sent in and get graded. This book isn't scarce at all. But there's value in this book. And why is that? Because there's demand for it. And at any given time, a 9.8 might be a bit scarce on the market. And I wouldn't ever say it with this book. I think there's probably, if you go to eBay, if you go to comic book shops, if you go to online sellers, there's probably going to be a decent amount on eBay and a decent amount available to buy at one given time. But look, even if there's 100 available, 109.8s of this book available at one given time on eBay, if 150 people want those books, there's going to be bidding wars, and demand dwarfs supply, so it's going to continue to drive the value of this book up, and that's all it takes. There may be 10,000 of these in a 9.8, but and it's worth more than this book in a 9.8 when there's only one, but it's just because nobody cares about this book, even though there's less of these out there. So again, scarcity or that rarity doesn't always equate to value, right? Now let's look at another book from this era. And this is Marvel Superheroes number 11. The True Origin of Rogue. This book, in my opinion, has always been a sleeper key. But look at this. Same era. This book came out in 92. And I'm not familiar with the print runs, but I'm going to assume that this book had a lower print run than your Amazing Spider-Man 361, which was heavily produced. I don't think it was in the millions. If I remember correctly, I'm gonna estimate somewhere around anywhere from, I think, a $500,000 to 800,000. But that's just a rough guess off the top of my head. If anybody knows those exact numbers, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, including for this one right here. But regardless if this book is scarce, like in terms of its production and print run, it is absolutely scarce on the market at any given time. It is so hard to find this book. I only see 1 or 2, maybe 3 of these books on the market at any given time, and they are in absolute high demand. And you know, look at these census numbers: 28 9.8s, 14 9.6s, 19 9.2s. Now, you could say, oh, well, it's a modern book. There's probably a large print run, which I don't know. Well, it's not quite modern. It's towards the end of the Copper Age, 92. People could look at this and say, well, it's just nobody cared about getting that graded. There's 28. There's probably a bunch of 9.8 potentials out there that just haven't been graded. I would be hesitant to believe that just because of what I just said. If you look at the market, there's not a lot of raw copies of this book on the market at any given time, let alone those high CGC or CBCS graded books. Now, one more example of this era would be Uncanny X-Men number 282. This is the second print, the first full appearance of a Bishop, or excuse me, the first cover appearance of Bishop, but it's actually his cameo. So this book right here was one that, as of about a few months ago, this book only had like 28 on the census and 9.8, but a few YouTubers talked about it and it piqued people's interest and people started sending their books in. This is what I was saying back then when there was only 20 something on the census of this book 6+ months ago, whenever that was. I told people, because people back then were saying, oh, there's only 20 something on the census. That means it's rare and I'm going to spend. And remember, when this book got hot, when that happened, this book was going for like $500 in a 9.8. And I was like, folks, this doesn't mean that this book is rare or scarce. Soon as there's a little bit of hype on it, somebody talks about this book, an influencer or YouTube creator or whatever, an app, and then so many people are going to be like, oh, well, I got like 5 copies of those, and they're all minty fresh. I'm going to go try to send them in so I can flip them. Well, what happened, guys? Now there's 129 9.8s on the market of this book. And what happened to the value of this book? It probably went down. And we're going to look at this. So this book in a 9.8 was selling for about 500 there for a minute. Let's see what some recent sales are. Let's see if we get a 9.8. So we haven't had a sale since February, and it was probably for under $400 there. But you see, so I mean, nobody's even buying this book right now. Let's see if there's actually any listed. So there is. So people are still listing them for about $340, $350, and nobody's buying them. They're just sitting up there. So yeah, so $399, $350. So that's 150 down, and nobody is buying them. And look, here's something too, guys. This is a first print. I don't know how long it's been sitting on here, but this is a first print, not even selling for $350. So again, it just goes to show you how you can't just trust the census count, because there is a plethora of these books out there that I guarantee you are 9.8 or 9.6 candidates that nobody's caring to send them in. Nobody wants to spend that kind of money. And now that this is increased by 6 times probably about the amount on the market. Now the supply is dwarfing the demand. and it's going to keep dropping that price down. So just be very, very careful of looking at census count and thinking, oh my gosh, it's rare, it's scarce, it must be valuable. All right, we're going to look at a couple more examples for some modern books. Now, let's look at Edge of Spider-Verse #2, first appearance of Gwen Stacy as, Spider-Gwen, aka Spider-Woman. So we got 10,796 on the census, 5,697, 9.8. So is it like rare? Is it scarce in terms of production? No. This book is, 8 years old, and although, you look at modern books with a smaller print runs, of course, there's going to be a lot more 9.8 and 9.6 candidates because people are taking care of these books. 5,697. But again, why is this book so valuable? Because you got to look at scarcity on the market at any given time, how many are available, the supply versus the demand at any given time on the market. And if there's only 59.8s on the market at any given time and 60 or 70 people want it, it's going to keep driving that price of those books up. So there's absolutely high demand. But we're going to compare it to another book that came out around the same time, about a year earlier. This is All New X-Men #1, not a huge key or anything. Obviously, there's so many #1s that started in this era with the Marvel Now, and then they kept resetting them. But let's look at this. We have 591 copies on the census. And look, I mean, like I said, when we get into modern books, a lot less lower grades. I mean, I don't know who would even send this in if they knew it was somewhere around a 7 or 7.5. But we have 488 in a 9.8. Now, so in a scheme of things, you could look at that and say, well, I mean, shoot, that's scarce. Look at this. This book in a 9.8 is going for what? I haven't checked in a while, but we got more than that. I mean, we got a 9.6 sitting at over 800. So that 9.8 is sitting way over 1,000, maybe even 1,500 plus. And there's over 5,000 of them on the census. Well, I mean, shoot, this book is a year older and it only has 488 on the census. That must mean this book is worth like $3,000 in a 9.8. Obviously, that's not the case because it's all about the supply and the demand. We don't demand this book, so people aren't sending this book in as much to get graded because we're just simply not willing to pay that much money for a 9.8 slab of All New X-Men #1. So again, when we look at 9.8s or even any grade, you look at the total number grade of the total universals, and then you're breaking it apart by grade. You got to take into all the factors that we showcase today. You got to look at age of the book. Age of the book obviously is going to play a role. But then you also have to cross-reference them to not only other books in their era to say, well, is this low on the census because it's just not desired and nobody cares about it? Or is it low on the census because of its age and its low and high grade? To where then you cross-reference them to modern books. And is a modern book low on the census because nobody cares about it? Or for some reason, like, this one right here, maybe it just really had a low print run and it is scarce out there. And that's why you're not seeing a lot of graded issues on the market or on the census as well. So that is the video for today, folks. I hope this helped you all, get a little better concrete understanding of analyzing the census in the market for, how you should gauge approaching books that you're in the market for, and how to gauge how much you should be spending on these books. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And again, folks, if you aren't subscribed to the channel, please do so. I'm here almost every day making content for you all. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be well, and until next time.